So the last set of trig functions that we want to look at are the secant and cosecant functions, and how do we graph those? Well, first thing we want to make sure we understand is that secant and cosecant are the reciprocals of the cosine and sine. So the secant is the 1 over the cosine. So if we would say, okay, we say secant of theta is 1 over cosine of theta. And this is an important relationship because if we want to graph the secant, we first need to graph the cosine. So we're going to just graph y equals cosine of x minus pi over 4, because the secant graph is related to the cosine graph. So the last set of instructions for how to graph trig functions are related to graphing either cosecant or secant. And as we could see, the equation is already in the form that we need it to be. We don't have to factor out the b. We know that the period is 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. The amplitude is, I should put a colon there as well, amplitude is 1. And so if we just graph this function, we would just follow the steps that we've been talking about and on this worksheet, get the equation in the above form. Done that, we found the period. We want to plot the period. So let's go ahead and do that. Ultimately, we're going to be moving this graph to the right, pi over 4. So we can go ahead and put the y-axis way to the left. And then because we're going to move it pi over 4 to the right, we're going to leave a little space. So we're going to let the 2 pi, the period, be the distance from 0 to 2 pi would be there, leaving a little space to the right. So we're going to divide the period into 4 equal sections. We've done this a million times, so this is no different. Again, we're drawing the graph of cosine, and then we're going to draw the graph of the secant from that. So now, drawing the midline again is y equals 0. There's no shifting up or down. Find and label the amplitude. We already found the amplitude is 1. We're going to draw it a little bit closer to the x-axis on this one so you could see what the graph of the secant is going to look like. And then draw the sinusoidal graph without the shift left or right. And it's a cosine, which we know starts up here. And if we use the 5-point system, we would plot the 5 points, and we're going to draw. So there's a few steps to this one. We're first going to draw the cosine graph without the shift. Then we're going to draw the cosine graph with the shift. Then we're ultimately going to draw the graph of the secant with the shift. So shifting this graph here to the right pi over 4 radians, we would just want to make sure we have pi over 4 radians marked so we're going to section our x-axis into pi over 4 radians, which is just half of pi over 2. So half of pi over 2 is pi over 4, and then halfway between pi over 2 and pi is 3 pi over 4. So we're just going to fill in the numbers, 5 pi over 4 as well as 7 pi over 4, and then 8 pi over 4, and then one more, 9 pi over 4. So 9 pi over 4 is where this graph ends, and pi over 4 is where the graph starts, because we're going to take this dotted graph, we're going to move it to the right, pi over 4. So the midline point gets moved to the right, the low point gets moved to the right, another midline point gets moved to the right, and then the high point gets moved to the right. And this one, like I said, we're going to draw this one dotted as well. So this one dotted, this is now the graph of the cosine and shifted as well. So then all we have to do is we sketched the sinusoidal graph dashed, and using this purple dashed graph, we're going to draw the graph of secant. Now, wherever the cosine is equal to 0, that becomes a vertical tangent line on the graph of the secant. Oh shoot, that was a bad spot there. Uh, so where the purple graph hits the x-axis is where the cosine of x minus pi over 4 is equal to 0. And again, that's where the secant would have a vertical asymptote. And then wherever the high point is on the cosine graph is going to be the low point for the secant graph. And the low point on the sine graph is the high point on the secant graph. So the secant graph, as you've seen, is going to go in the opposite direction as the, let's see, pi over 4, and it's going to be negative pi over 4 over there, so it's going to keep kind of going out like that. And that right there, from pi over 4 to 9 pi over 4, is one period of the secant function, because the cosine function is also has a period of 2 pi. And so that is how you draw the graph of the secant of x minus pi over 4.